Hey, it's Mars, and this is Let's Make a Dungeon Crawler Part 24. In this video, we'll be taking our first look at animation events. I have a blacksmith NPC, and I'd like to do two things. First, I'd like to play a hammering sound at a specific point in his animation, and secondly, I'd like him to stop hammering when the player gets too close. I'll click on my trigger area here and uncheck the mesh renderer so that it's not in our way. And I'm also going to turn off the roof while we work inside of this building. My blacksmith that I purchased is a legacy animation rig, so I'm going to change it to humanoid and hit apply, and then drop him into my scene. Since he's a humanoid, he comes with an animator component. If he was legacy, he would come with an animation component. So this is perfect. We just need a controller now. So I will right click and create an animator controller. I'll put him in place. And turn off the extra tools he's holding. Now if we go to his animator controller, I'll double click on that here, we can drop in animations. We want to do this because if we go to the animation window, it's empty. So to our animator, I will drop in his animations. And it's a hammer animation and an idle animation. Now that they're in his animator controller, in his animator component, they've shown up in the animation window. So in his animation, I can scrub through the timeline here, and right about here, when he hits the sword, I'd like to keyframe using this button to add an animation event, and that's where we can trigger a custom plyBlox event. Unfortunately, as it says here, hammer is read-only. So I'm going to grab that animation, which is a child of the model itself, and I'll hit Ctrl D. That duplicates the animation and makes it no longer read-only. So I'll go back to the animator controller, delete the read-only hammer animation, and drop the new one inside. I'll also right-click and make it the layer's default state. So now, if I go to hammer, I can now hit the keyframe button. I'll scrub to when he hits the sword, add a keyframe, and now we can choose to trigger a custom event. Let's first make the plyBlox component here. And now, let's do a trigger event. The string will be the custom event's name. Let's call that play sound. In the plyBlox, I'll do a common custom named play sound, and I'm going to do audio. I would use play, however you don't get to specify which sound, so let's do play one shot, and we will be playing a hammer sound via self. I'll give this blacksmith an audio source. Scaled by, I'll use a float of 0.4, which sounds good for my sound effect. And then just like the campfire scene, I'm going to set the spatial blend to a 3D sound with a spread of 180, with a linear roll-off of 1 to 10. 10 is a bit large. We'll be able to hear the sound outside of the building, but that's okay. We'll see how it looks in game. So let's try it out and see what happens. Alright. Now, like I said, I want him to stop when I get close to him. So if we take a look at the animator controller, we have our two animations, and I want to transition between them. I'll make the transitions now. For the conditions, I'd like to use trigger parameters. So this one can be called go idle, and I'll make another go hammer. Hammering to idle. The condition is go idle, and I'll turn off has exit time so the hammer animation doesn't have to finish before we transition. Similarly, from idle to hammer, let's make the condition go hammer with no exit time. Now we just need to set the trigger parameter. We'll do that inside of a trigger area. Once again, I'll make a 3D cube. That looks alright. Maybe a bit bigger. I'll set the layer to no draw so that our camera once again can't see this area, and I will give it the no draw material. Perfect. Let's check the is trigger checkbox and also give it a rigid body with no gravity. And lastly, a plyBlox, and we're going to say trigger with info on trigger enter if character player is ready, since once again as soon as we hit play, everything in this room will enter this trigger. So if the player is ready, and if the trigger object equals player, that's A equals B. Trigger object is a temporary game object. Get temp game object. Trigger object equals a character player. Now let's set the trigger parameter go idle. That's an anim. Set trigger param go idle in, and let's set a reference to the blacksmith. We could drag him in from the hierarchy, but I'd like to use a local game object, blacksmith. And in the trigger, I will drag him in. So now we're setting go idle in get local game object blacksmith. And we'll copy this set of blocks to a trigger with info on trigger exit. If the player exited the trigger, let's go hammer. Let's hit play and see what happens. That's all for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and if you learned something, hit that like button. Join me next time, and we'll turn this blacksmith into a quest giver.